When you view an infotext, webinar, or movie, you do so with 4 caveats. First, you are agreeing to the terms posted at the webpage listed on this slide. Second, our lawyers want you to know that what infotext presents is often time-dated or about new trends, regulations, or guidance, and therefore we cannot provide this material with any warranty whatsoever. Thirdly, material provided with infotext webinars and movies is copyrighted. You keep the copyright to material customized to your organization, but Infotext reserves the right to use the material in other engagements and boilerplates. See our Transfer of Copyright Agreement at the webpage listed in the slide. Finally, those who view our webinars or movies may be added to an email mailing list. If you do not wish to receive notice of additional educational opportunities, please accept our apologies and please opt out at the webpage shown on the slide.
Thank you, directors, for joining me today. My name is Adam Reynolds, and I am the Senior Staff Auditor and Lead Non-Technical Auditor for Infotext. And the fact you're able to dedicate part of your time from your very busy schedule to learn about incident response and your role, and really, unfortunately, the notion that it's a matter of when, not if, means a lot to your information security officer. Because when there's an incident, again, not if, but when, you're going to be part of that process. And the more you know about it, what to expect, and how you can help, the better your institution will be in responding to it. Because, as I just stated, it really boils down to the fact that at some point, someone at your institution will make a mistake that, if not handled properly, could affect the bank's reputation. And it might not even be someone at your institution, but a vendor you're working with, a software company that provides an application you use. But we're not focusing on how right now, because it really is a matter of when. Because of course an incident is a bad thing. But if we can learn from it, respond to it in the right way, we can turn that incident into something good. Or lemons to lemonade, as they say. We just need to make sure we have the sugar, or in this case, the right response to turn it into something good. And we've been helping institutions respond to incidents since the year 2000. And that's one thing we really learned early on, that if you have a good incident response process in place, a good plan, and good team members, you can turn that lemon into lemonade. And as a director, you're probably well aware of the fact that you have an incident response plan in place. The board is responsible for annually approving the policy that requires an incident response program to be in place. And the main part of that program is that there's an incident response plan so that you're ready. It documents how you're going to respond to an incident. And then we annually exercise that plan, normally in the form of a tabletop test where the incident response team members sit down together and walk through a likely scenario, using the plan as a template for their response, to walk through what it would look like in the real world. It's practice of the team on how to respond and practice of the plan to ensure it supports that response. And the policy has some very important components in it. First is how the institution classifies incidents. This can really depend on the institution, but the one we use at Infotext is disclosure, the worst type of incident at the top, followed by security incidents and then negative incidents. And we define a disclosure incident as an incident that requires disclosure of the incident to customers. Again, really the worst case, because that's against our main goal of protecting customers and their information. And your institution may not classify this type of incident by itself. It may be called a critical incident or even a GLBA incident, going back to the fact that it's centered around customer information. But we wanted to keep our incident classification simple, so we use a 3-tier approach as stated, really centered around whether or not we need to notify or disclose the incident to our customers. And the good news is, or bad news depending on how you look at it, is as a director, it's really only these disclosure events you're going to be involved in, or more involved really than the other types of incidents where they may be reported to you, or you may see them discussed in your annual information security report, which goes over past incidents. But it's really the disclosure incidents that are going to be requiring a response from you, which is what I'm going to get into this video. What should you do to be prepared to respond to an incident like this? So the policy might start off saying that really there is no such thing as 100% security. So when incidents do happen, our first priority is to protect our customers' information. and that they should, really be your primary goal as a board member to make sure, we're staying focused on the fact that we need to be protecting our customers and their information. Beyond that, the policy establishes that management is going to follow the law and regulations, especially as it pertains to customer information. And then that the incident response team that's been created as part of the incident response program is going to keep the board informed appropriately. It doesn't mean calling you in the middle of the night for a small incident, but maybe for that top incident classification, a disclosure incident, that top priority that involves customer information where there is a potential for misuse of that information. But still, you probably wouldn't get a call in the middle of the night, but we may need to be assembling the team, assembling the board on a Sunday or even a holiday. Then the policy requires the creation of a plan, and it is 2025. So, at this point in time, it's about making sure that plan is still updated and relevant. Not so much the creation of that, as it's already been created for many years, but keeping it up to date and relevant that it's currently reflecting, current processes. And it will also probably spell out the classification structure we already spoke about. The classifications we're going to be using to implement the plan itself. And then another very important part is the testing of the plan. To make sure it's tested regularly and will work when needed. So let me speak about these tests for a minute. We want all incident response team members to be there. We want to ensure the whole team knows how this works. We also want to test a scenario that would lead to notifying customers, as this is the worst case scenario. And we want to make sure the plan supports our response even in the worst case scenario. And typically, these are normally the most involved types of incidents. So walking through a harder, more involved incident will be a better stress test against our plan than a simple one. We can exercise other types of incidents as well, such as ransomware or one of your higher likelihood incidents from your risk assessments. So we would always recommend walking through multiple scenarios, a disclosure incident, a ransomware incident, and something that's tailored more to the specific risks you face at your institution. And the reason we do this is so the team learns the appropriate steps or actions to take to respond to an incident in the real world. It will also help our team members understand the technical tools, such as the SIEM and other IT tools that monitor for incidents and how they can be leveraged in an incident as well. And we also want to test communication between team members, between the team and the board, as well as between outside parties such as examiners and regulators, which we would need to notify during a disclosure incident. And it's this testing that makes sure our team knows what to do, how to do it, and that the information is up to date and ready when it's needed. And then going back to the plan itself, as I mentioned a minute ago, it's also going to discuss who we need to contact outside of the bank during an incident. And we may be required to notify examiners, even if we don't have to notify customers, such as with the Computer Security Incident Notification Rule, also known as the 36-hour rule, or have an incident that involved customer information, but as there is no potential for misuse, customers are not notified, but examiners may still be. And one reason is to confirm with them that they agree customers would not need to be notified in this particular incident. And the plan will also document insurance, so we know the basics about our coverage and who to contact. We want to know the types of coverage the institution has, the deductibles, really what it's going to cost to notify customers and to provide them with credit monitoring. And this also includes how the insurance will help us respond. Does the cyber insurance include money for a forensics investigation? If it does, are there specific providers we need to contact? And then two other important items, which I'll go into more detail on both of these right after this, but is the requirement to establish user containment and broadcast awareness methodologies. So first, user containment. Once someone has noticed an incident or that something may be happening, we want their first priority to be containment. If someone clicked on a link they shouldn't have, and now a bunch of windows are popping up on their screen, or they noticed unusual activity, we want them to disconnect their computer from the network so it doesn't spread. If a technical team member notices a lot of data transfer to an IP address in China, they should shut that down. And that's because containing the incident stops the spread of it. It's simply what we do when we grow suspicious, and we want to make sure board members know that as well. That user containment is how we make sure that whatever damage has been done doesn't spread. And then after user containment is broadcasting awareness. If we can make everyone aware of the fact that there might be an incident occurring, we're going to respond to that incident much better and help contain it as well. And the way broadcasting awareness works is, first, that user containment. The first user who notices something tries to contain it if possible, again, such as disconnecting from the network. Beyond that, the person should get with their immediate supervisor. And then the supervisor will decide on who is the appropriate everybody to inform after that, which might be the physical security officer, it might be the branch managers, it might be all employees. This will always change with the type of incident, but it's making sure that the right people are informed. And this might even include people outside the institution. If a suspicious person came into the branch, you might want to notify authorities or even other banks in the area. If an employee clicked on a link in a suspicious email, maybe we should let all employees know that there is a phishing attempt happening. Then, once the appropriate everybody is notified, we need to make sure the ISO is notified if they haven't been already. Many times, the everybody notification will include the information security officer, but not necessarily. So this is the step where we want to make sure the ISO has been notified. And we want to make sure this is a real notification. A lot of times an employee might click on a malicious link and they realize it, and then send an email to the ISO who may be away. Maybe they're working on something else or at lunch. But that is not sufficient when every second counts in responding to an incident. And that's also why we include the everybody before the information security officer. If they're busy, how are other employees going to know there isn't a phishing attempt going around if we only try and notify the ISO? And the ISO then decides if it rises to the level of an incident that requires pulling the incident response team together. This team then works with the information security officer to determine if other parties need contacted and when, such as yourself on the board or the authorities or customers. And so this brings us to your role. Every year, you get to approve policies, like the acceptable use policy, and I bet most directors listening to this have seen that policy year after year after year. And at this point, you're really only focusing on the changes because you've seen it 15 years in a row. But the incident response policy should be a bit different. It should be pretty concise, taking a page, maybe two, because it should be basic, really only laying the foundation, as we discussed earlier, for the incident response program itself. So you should read the entire incident response policy every year and really know what you're directing your management team to do, when and not if that event occurs. And then there's really one other thing that should be done besides knowing the policy, and that's focusing in on the results of any testing, specifically the tabletop tests, and focusing on the results of the test. There should be a post-mortem review with the test stating the goals of the test, the outcome, and any lessons learned. And it's those lessons learned that you want to make sure are followed up on. In the test, the team may have found a deficiency in the incident response plan, or something that they could implement that would improve your response process. So really focusing on what was learned and how you can improve your process, and make sure those are followed through on. Because the goal of the test is not only to show that your incident response program works, but to improve it as well. But those two items are really just the preparation for your role, to understand the policy and make sure the program is tested. Following that, what we really need to talk about is your role when it comes to being in the incident, when you get the call. And hopefully that call doesn't come in the middle of the night, but it could. That's kind of a worst case scenario. But worst case scenarios are something that need to be discussed as part of incident response. So what you, as a director, need to realize is that your role really should be to help calm the team down. We've seen directors, and not so much anymore, but again, not myself. I've been involved in incident response at Infotex for the last 10 years, but Dan has stories going back to 2000 where we've seen responses that are the complete opposite of calming. And of course, being involved in an incident is stressful, but the board's role is to calmly understand and assist with the response. to participate in those emergency meetings when they come up, and ask questions to understand and guide the response. Be ready when the incident happens, when that call comes in, and calmly participate and ask questions to help from a high level. And I've got an analogy I stole from Dan when he last presented this, and unfortunately, I can't say I've ever experienced this because I've never been skydiving. I'm not a fan of heights myself, but Dan has, and many other people I know have. But this seemed like a very apt analogy, so I'm going to use it as well. So hopefully this illustrates what the director's role should be during an incident. If you've ever skydived, you know what it's like to be up at the top from a bird's eye view. And it's different when, you're just in a plane, because it's just you, or more likely you and your tandem diver, but the jump starts off at, let's say, 12,000 feet, and you free fall for around 30 seconds. And it's not that part that's the analogy for the director. That part actually probably works better for what the information security officer is going through when he has to deal with the incident and decide to notify the board. But once you pull the cord, that parachute opens up. It's quiet, and you have a chance to just look around and reflect. You can see much more of the world than you can from the ground. You can't see all the details, but you can see how everything fits together. It's calm, it's quiet, and you can think about what you're seeing. And that's the point I'm trying to make. When an incident starts, it can seem like a panic, like that initial free fall. But we want to get to the part where it's calm, to really take in what's happening, to see how everything fits together, and to think about it, reflect on it, which will help us start asking the right questions. We don't want our head filled with all the noise of falling from 12,000 feet. Or thinking about what would happen if our controls failed, the parachute in this example. But that initial panic will happen. But we want to realize and then get to the point where we can calmly react, because we know we have a good, practiced, and tested response plan. And that's your role as a director, to understand the incident at a high level, calmly react to the situation, and ask questions to better understand the incident. And this will also help with making sure that there is a good culture of security at the institution as well. So you might be asking yourself now, what right questions? What security culture? So let me explain. And the answer to these two roles, asking the right questions and establishing a security culture, are related to each other, in that asking the right questions leads to the security culture. And now really establishing that security culture is a much longer talk. But at a high level, there are 7 things we feel define a culture of security. Board engagement, seeing information security is a customer service, relationship with examiners, management participation, audit readiness, organic security, or going above and beyond what's required, and self-reporting. But we think this starts at the top with you. Board engagement, that your information security officer should be coming into the board meetings and engaging with its members, discussing what's going on related to information security and answering any questions the board members might have. And just the fact that you, as a director, are watching this movie is great, because that itself shows a level of engagement. And I'll talk a little bit more about the security culture, but I want to turn to and drill down on the board engagement part, which is the most important part for you. So I want to ask, do you know what the answer to this question here is? What's the financial cost of a major breach versus a delinquent loan? One breach can bring down the whole institution and bring it to a halt. So going back to the skydiving metaphor, I'm sure the one thing that is on your mind when you leave the plane is the question of whether your parachute is going to open, right? And unless you're a professional skydiver, you're going tandem. You're putting your faith in that other person to know what to do, to know how the parachute works, and to deploy it correctly. And I know I would probably have a few questions for that person about the process, about how it works, how they know what to do. And, that's what Dan said as well, that when you're putting something so important on the line, you want to make sure those people know what they're doing, and you'll have questions for them. It's only natural. And in your world, that parachute is the incident response program. So my question to you is incident response working at your institution? And we've already gone over how to answer that question. Have you read the results of the testing? So the way we make sure one breach does not break the bank is by proactive incident response planning. We all make mistakes, and it's a matter of when, not if. So it's always how we respond to those mistakes, those incidents, that separates good businesses from marginal or worse businesses. Which brings me back to your role. Are you asking the right questions? And what are those right questions? I would go back to those 7 items. Use these 7 items as the basis for your questions. 1. Are we engaged as a board? 2. Do we see security as a form of customer service or as an inconvenience to our customers? 3. What is our relationship with our auditors and examiners? Are we fighting them, or do we see them as partners? 4. Is management participating in training and exercises? Or do our actions show security is more of an afterthought? 5. Are we ready for our audits and examinations, or scrambling at the last minute to put everything together? 6. Do we wait to be told, or are we organically managing risk as it arises? Or are we doing the bare minimum as required by guidance, or are we going above and beyond? And finally, 7. Are we encouraging our team members to tell us when they think they may have made a mistake? When a user clicks on a link they shouldn't have? Do they feel comfortable telling their supervisor, informing that appropriate everybody, and start the broadcasting awareness process? Does management know how not to beat someone up for making a mistake? So evaluate yourself against these 7 things to see if you have a good security culture. But if we could boil it down into asking one right question to make sure our controls, our parachute, is working. First, let me say this is a really hard question to answer without actually going through the process yourself at your specific institution. A lot of times, that's a question that can only be answered for yourself when you're in that position. So before I answer what that one question is, let me say there is variability at every institution. So we really encourage all our clients to have at least one board member sit in on those tabletop exercises, to walk through an incident, to see what that process is like and participate. But if there's one fundamental question to always ask, it's how does this protect our customers? It's the one question as a director you can always pull out. How does this protect our customers? Because when we're in an incident, our customers are watching. And they're watching when we have to make a fundamental choice. We can either protect our reputation or we can protect our customers. And our customers are smart. They've most likely been through this before because it is 2025, and I would say it's almost guaranteed everyone's information is out there because it has been breached in the past, whether that's from hospitals, government agencies, financial institutions, or other companies. And a great example of this is the Equifax breach, where they chose to cover themselves first. They had the option of protecting information, or really their clients first, but they responded with actions that protected themselves first, selling stocks before disclosing the breach. And we want our customers to see that we value their safety over our needs, that their safety is our first priority, not ourselves. And that alone will turn lemons into lemonade, showing that our customers are really first. And it's that simple. Protecting our customers is protecting our reputation. So again, that one fundamental question we can always ask is how is this protecting our customers? That's how we can turn the incident around. And I know that's not always an easy ask, but you have to trust it. If you help your management team understand that protecting the customer is protecting the institution, and part of that control is board awareness, again at the top. So thank you for watching this movie, and I hope we've helped you understand why incident response is so important, what your role is in it, and how we can turn those incidents into positives.